Warmly welcome to our commemoration of Raoul Wallenberg. I'm the Swedish ambassador here in Canada, Urban, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to tonight's event. As you know, 17th of January is the day when Canada is commemorating Raoul Wallenberg and celebrating his deeds. And he is actually Canada's first honorary citizen. And that makes, of course, us Swedes very proud and very happy. And it's lovely for us at the Swedish Embassy here in Ottawa to be able to organize this webinar together with lots of other organizations and very interesting speakers today. And the whole purpose of this is that we should never forget the Holocaust, that we should always find new means to fight racism, discrimination, and anti-Semitism. And that is what this webinar is all about. And now I would like to hand over to our Master of Ceremony, Lars Henriksson, who is our Honorary Consul General in Toronto. Please, Lars.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Ambassador Lean has been Ambassador of Sweden to Canada since February 2019. Prior to this appointment, he had a very successful career in the Swedish Parliament, which ended 2014 to 2018 when he was elected Speaker of the House. And it is now my pleasure to introduce two very brief remarks, messages from two important people. First, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and he will be followed by remarks from our former Swedish Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven.
Today's discussions will allow us to continue developing a common international approach to fighting anti-Semitism. We must work together to promote inclusion and respect for diversity around the world, because no one should fear to express their Jewish identity or practice their religion. And no one should face hatred in their own neighborhood, no matter where they live. On November 25th, 2020, we appointed Irving Cutler as Canada's Special Envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. His mandate is to help advance Holocaust education, preserve the stories of survivors through younger generations, and combat domestic and global anti-Semitism. Combating racism is something that we all need to do together. With prevention, education, and action, Canada will always be there to stand up alongside you all for inclusion, respect, and human rights.
Anti-Semitism should have ended with the Holocaust when that came to light, but it did not. Anti-Semitism is present in our societies. It is present in extreme right-wing groups, in parts of the left, in Islamist environments, and among ordinary citizens. We see anti-Semitism among adults and children who have fled to Europe from countries where hatred of Jews is promoted in schools and through state propaganda. It is present in Malmö too, like in so many other cities in Europe. But it is not the presence of anti-Semitism that makes Malmö different. It is the will to free the city from anti-Semitism and racism. The mayor of Malmö, Kailyn Rollins, asked the government to hold the forum here, a request that the government was pleased to grant. Like many other groups, Jews are subjected to humiliating abuse and discrimination. These are forms of racism. But anti-Semitism differs from other racism. Anti-Semitism is in itself a conspiracy theory based on notions on Jewish power, Jewish interest, and the desire to secretly rule the world. This anti-Semitism needs no Jews to emerge and grow. In Sweden, fear of and prejudice against Jews existed long before Jews lived in Sweden. And it is this specific and toxic form that drives conspiracy theories on social media also now about the COVID-19 pandemic and the Great Replacement. In its most extreme form, it resulted in the Holocaust, the Shoah. Dear friends, it is our duty to listen to the stories of Holocaust survivors. It is our duty to continue to tell their stories when they are no longer among us. And it is our duty to do whatever is necessary to counter the forces that threaten human dignity. It is our duty to remember and react.
Thank you, Prime Ministers, for your very thoughtful and important remarks. Let me now introduce two gentlemen, the Honourable Irving Cutler and George Prager. The Honourable Irving Cutler is the founder and international chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. As we heard from Prime Minister Trudeau, he's also Canada's special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. He's a member of the high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom, emeritus professor of law at the McGill University in Montreal, international human rights lawyer and counsel of prisoners of conscience. He's a former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada and a long-term member of the Canadian Parliament. George Prager is a dual citizen of Sweden and Canada, and he's a child survivor of the Shoah in Hungary, surviving it in Budapest and on the countryside. As chair of the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce in 1985, he had the honor of receiving a framed copy of the bill proclaiming Raoul Wallenberg Canada's first honorary citizen. That framed document is now on permanent display at the Department of Global Affairs in Stockholm. Gentlemen, please.
Irving, it's an honor to have you with us today. You're a leading light to us, not only as a proponent of fighting anti-Semitism, but also as a well-known international lawyer who, among others, defended Nathan Sharansky, Nelson Mandela, and others. Today, I would like to ask you, what is the importance of this commemorative event to honor Raoul Wallenberg?
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to join with you today. You are, in effect, a child of the Shoah survivor. You bore witness to what was happening in Hungary. And today we remember and pay tribute to Raoul Wallenberg, as Ambassador Allen said, Canada's first honorary citizen, who demonstrated how one person with the compassion to care and the courage to act can confront evil, prevail, and transform history. From mid-May to the beginning of July 1944, as you know only too well, George, some 440,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to the death camp Auschwitz, itself the most brutal extermination camp of the 20th century. Raoul Wallenberg arrived as a Swedish diplomat in the Swedish legation in Budapest in mid-July 1944. And through a combination of ingenuity and inspiration, bravado and bluff, and mobilizing other diplomats and persons there, managed to save some 100,000 Jews in the last 6 months of 1944. So what the international bystander community was not able to do, one person was able to save more Jews than almost any single government, organization, or group. And he may be said to have presaged what today we call international human rights and humanitarian law in distributing Schutzpasses, diplomatic passports, which gave protective immunity to its recipients, in setting up safe houses, serving as sanctuary for their inhabitants. By these means alone, Wallenberg saved more than 30,000 Jews. By establishing soup kitchens, hospitals, orphanages, bringing a semblance of dignity to the elderly, the sick, women and children amidst the evils and horrors of the Holocaust, Wallenberg may be said to have presaged what today we would call international humanitarian assistance. In rescuing civilians from the horrors and evils of the Holocaust, he may be said to have presaged what today we would call international humanitarian intervention, or the responsibility to protect doctrine. And his last rescue was perhaps the most memorable. It brought all his skills of ingenuity and bravado together. When the Nazi generals were marching on the Budapest ghetto, threatening to blow it up and liquidate the Jews there, Wallenberg warned them that if these Nazi generals did not desist, they would be held responsible for their crimes. They would be prosecuted and perhaps even executed. And so they desisted. And by this act alone, some 70,000 Jews were saved. So we are speaking today about a person who, when asked why he did what he did, answered in his modest way, "For me, there was no other choice." And with those words, he embodied the Talmudic idiom that if you save a single life, it is as if you have saved an entire universe.
Irving, thank you very, very much indeed. Interestingly, I've just heard that Naftali Bennett's grandparents, present Prime Minister of Israel, were also saved by Raoul Wallenberg. Very interesting to find that out. No,
his parents were in Canada for a while as emissaries of the Jewish Agency.
Very, very interesting. That I didn't know. I'd like to move on to the mandates, to the different roles and responsibilities you have in combating anti-Semitism, and perhaps briefly summarize the 6 intersecting mandates which this entails.
Yeah, thank you, George. I'll try and be brief. As you mentioned, I have 6 intersecting mandates: preserving Holocaust remembrance domestically and internationally, combating anti-Semitism domestically and internationally, heading up the Canadian delegation to IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and serving also as a special envoy to intergovernmental bodies in that regard, being the OAS or the European Union, UN agencies, and the like. And each of these mandates, I should say, in my counterparts in other countries have one of these mandates. The Prime Minister, when he established it, I've gotten the 6 mandates, but it's been a certain advantage in that it's given me a holistic perspective. But let me say, each of these mandates has their own constituent features. I'll very briefly summarize them. For example, in the matter of preserving Holocaust remembrance, we try to ensure that we commemorate important historical moments of remembrance, as we did this year, the 81st anniversary of Babi Yar, or the 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht, or as we're doing now with Raoul Wallenberg Day, or as we will do 10 days from now, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So Holocaust remembrance in terms of remembering so that we can act upon the lessons of these commemorative events are very important. The second important dimension in this is, I would say, the Holocaust education and the importance of education, not only about the Holocaust, but education about anti-Semitism. And I'll give just one example here, which we use. 1.3 million people were deported to the death camp Auschwitz. 1.1 million of them were Jews. Let there be no mistake about it. Jews were murdered in the Holocaust because of anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism itself did not die in the Holocaust, and it remains a bloody canary in the mineshaft of global evil today. And so combating anti-Semitism has its own constituent objectives, amongst them being to enhance both the adoption of and the implementation of the IRA working definition on anti-Semitism, which is the most authoritative, comprehensive, and international consensus definition we have, and what is not as well known as it deserves to be, the most representative. It was adopted over a 15-year decision-making process by intergovernmental bodies, governments, parliaments, civil society, and the like. With regard to IRA, I head up the Canadian delegation to IRA, where we seek to both learn about and implement its own founding objectives. It was founded at the Stockholm conference in Sweden in 2000. I was part of the Canadian delegation at the time, and IRA spearheads teaching and learning about the Holocaust, spearheads the combating of Holocaust denial and distortion, a campaign as we meet called Protect the Facts, spearheads our understanding of the genocide of the Roma that occurred also during that period, and spearheads the combating of mass atrocities. So IRA plays a very important role in what might be called education, learning, and acting upon the lessons of the Holocaust and the combating of anti-Semitism. And finally, as I mentioned, intergovernmental representations. I participated in many forums that have taken place at the UN Human Rights Council, at the UN as a whole, and otherwise with respect to my mandate.
Thank you, Irving, for that explanation. I'd like to refer to what Prime Minister Löfven just said. And he said that anti-Semitism is the longest hatred that there has ever been. And I think this is also something that you referred to. And would you like to explain to us what that really means?
Yes, anti-Semitism is the oldest, the longest, the most enduring, the most virulent, and the most lethal of hatreds. It's also one that mutates and metastasizes over time, but is always anchored in one foundational conspiratory refrain, and that is the Jews, the Jewish people, Israel, as the enemy of all that is good and the embodiment of all that is evil. And that continues to find a particular expression today, as it has throughout history. In other words, this notion of the Jews as the enemy of the good and the embodiment of evil would always find expression in whatever is the particular zeitgeist of the time. So when it was Christianity, the Jews were guilty of deicide. When it was the poisoning of when it was the Black Plague, the Jews were the poisoners of the wells. When it was nationalism, the Jews were ruthless cosmopolitans. When it was Nazism, the Jews were the non-Aryans and the Untermenschen. And then when human rights emerged as the new secular religion of our time, then the Jewish people in Israel were held out as being the major human rights violator of our time. In other words, as if these were the new anti-Christ of our time. So whatever is the zeitgeist at any particular moment, that's what's seized upon to portray the Jew as being in a conspiracy to both be the enemy of whatever is the good of the time or to embody all the evil at any given moment?
Well, I think that's a very good explanation, which actually also covers the next question, which described the resurgence of anti-Semitism, what has led to it, and what it means. The follow-up question is, what has triggered this resurgence in your view?
Well, we are witnessing today an old, new, escalating, global, resurgent and violent anti-Semitism, grounded in classical anti-Semitism, but distinguishable from it, that first found international juridical expression in the UN Zionism is Racism resolution, which US ambassador to the UN at the time, Daniel Moynihan, said it gave the abomination of anti-Semitism the appearance of international legal sanction. But it has gone even dramatically beyond that. And there have been, I would say, two tipping points with respect to this resurgent global anti-Semitism, both of which have occurred in the 21st century. The first was the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa in September 2001. I have to admit that when it was first announced in 1997 there was going to be such a world conference, I greeted it with great interest and indeed anticipation. This was going to be the first World Conference Against Racism of the 21st century. This indeed was going to be the first international human rights conference of the 21st century, and it was going to be taking place in Durban, South Africa, to commemorate the dismantling of apartheid. And I myself had been arrested actually in 1981 in South Africa when I was there as part of the anti-apartheid movement. But what happened in Durban in 2001 was truly Orwellian, if I can use an oft-abused metaphor. A world conference against racism and hate turned into a conference of racism and hate against Israel and the Jewish people. A world conference for the promotion and protection of human rights turned into a conference to single out Israel and the Jewish people for selective opprobrium. A world conference that was to commemorate, as I mentioned, the dismantling of South African apartheid called for the dismantling of Israel as an apartheid state. And as we're meeting, George, I can still hear the chants, I can still see the images, I can still see the thousands of demonstrators in the streets day after day chanting that the struggle against apartheid in the 20th century required the dismantling of South Africa as an apartheid state, and the struggle against apartheid in the 21st century requires a dismantling now of Israel as an apartheid state. And I can still see the posters and the pamphlets and the emblems and every speaking about the protocols of the elders of Zion, which were pamphlets that were handed out. Israel, the Jewish people being compared to Nazis. Posters that too bad Israel didn't finish the job. A group of young students who were assaulted, and I remember being there witnessing it, saying you don't belong to the human race. And so Durban became the launching pad for the new anti-Semitism, what I would call the demonological anti-Semitism, the notion of Israel and thereby the Jewish people of Israel being a settler, colonialist, ethnic cleansing, child murdering, racist, apartheid, a Nazi state. All these refrains that we are hearing now daily. The second trigger that took place was the Hamas war against Israel last May, where, as we recall, Jews began to be targeted and threatened in their streets and in their communities, on the campuses. Synagogues were being torched, Holocaust memorials defaced, Jewish institutions vandalized, the whole resulting in two dramatic empirical data evidencing this. Number one, while for the last 4 years in Canada, hate crimes targeted Jews more than any other minority, what we found is that by May 2021, we had reached the same level of all the hate crimes of the whole of 2020, which was the largest year for hate crimes ever in Canada. Secondly, we saw the explosion of incendiary hate on the internet, where during the Hamas War, in 1 week, there were 17,000 tweets that Hitler was right, that 84% of the anti-Semitic posts have still not been taken down, and I can go on. So we've seen these two phenomenon, and the things that particularly concern me, I will have to say, are just the following, and I will just enumerate them in terms of this contemporary resurgence of anti-Semitism. One is we speak about anti-Semitism from the far right, from the far left, and from radical Islam. While that is true, that is not really the whole story at this point. What we are witnessing is a mainstreaming, a normalizing, a legitimation of anti-Semitism in the overall political culture, and the absence of outrage. In other words, underpinned by indifference and inaction. Secondly, the globalization phenomenon. What happens in Paris and London not only reverberates back in Montreal and Toronto, but replicates itself in Montreal and Toronto. It's part of an orchestrated campaign. When you had a convoys in the streets in London saying, "F the Jews will rape your daughters," we had the same type of convoys then replicated here in Canada. Then you have the third thing, the marginalization of the struggle against anti-Semitism in the necessary struggle against racism as a whole. So while we have to be involved in the struggle regarding racism against Indigenous people, against Blacks and people of color, against Asian Canadians, against Muslims, what is happening is that anti-Semitism is somehow being excluded or marginalized in that struggle against racism. And the final thing in this regard is that anti-Semitism gets laundered under the very cover of anti-racism itself. And if I have to point one particular thing that is a particular threat here in Canada, it's because in Canada, the United Nations is part of our DNA. Human rights is an organizing idiom of our Canadian foreign policy. International law is seen as a centerpiece of our identity. Anti-racism is an organizing idiom of what we take to be our identity. Well, what we are witnessing now is the laundering of anti-Semitism under the protective cover of the UN, under the authority of international law, under the culture of human rights, under the very struggle against racism itself.
Okay, we have to move on. Thank you, Irving. Thank you, George. I just want to build on what Irving Cutler said, mentioned on the IRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. As he mentioned, it was founded in Stockholm. It was the initiative of then Prime Minister Göran Persson. And today it's an organization that is very active. There are 35 countries that are members, and there are some other organizations affiliated to the organization as well. Every year, the presidency is shifting, and Sweden will assume the presidency in March this year. We will have two speakers here, or participants from the organization. Andres Zanzi, who is the head of the Secretariat of the Swedish IRA presidency. He was actually the coordinator for the Malmö Forum, which took place in October last year. The Malmö Forum, International Forum for Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism. He will then be followed by Ambassador Ann Bernes, who is the incoming president of IRA. As I said, she will assume that role in March this year. She was originally a journalist, but joined the Swedish Foreign Service in 1994. And has been the ambassador, the Swedish ambassador for gender equality and coordinator of feminist foreign policy. That position she left last year. So here are the presentations by, start first with Andres Zanzi, and then with Bernice.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andres Sansi. I'm very happy to participate in this important event organized by our embassy in Ottawa. I work as the head of the Secretariat of the Swedish IRA presidency that will initiate its activities by the 1st of March this year. Before this, I also worked at the Secretariat that organized and was responsible for the program of the Malmö International Forum on Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism. My intervention today will focus on the Malmö Forum and the results from there. So, as you know, the Swedish government has been determined to continue to raise these issues nationally as well as internationally, and so was the former Prime Minister Stefan Löfven, who took the initiative to arrange the Malmö Forum. So in January 2020, Prime Minister Löfven invited approximately 50 heads of state and government and around 30 international organizations, civil society organizations, and social media companies to the Malmö Forum. In total, 74 delegations participated. The vast majority of them had a delegation on site, and many of these were led by high-level heads of delegation. The forum was initially to take place in October 2020, 20 years after the Stockholm International Forum on the Holocaust. Due to the unfortunate circumstances of the pandemic, the forum had to be postponed 1 year. Therefore, the forum finally took place on the 13th of October last year. We focused on 4 main themes that were highlighted and discussed during the forum. These were Holocaust Remembrance, Holocaust Education, combating anti-Semitism, anti-Gypsyism, and racism in all spheres of society, and combating anti-Semitism on social media platforms. The Stockholm Declaration and the 2020 IRA Ministerial Declaration were central starting points for the Malmö Forum. These documents are a solid ground for the work to combat anti-Semitism and to promote Holocaust remembrance. All the participants were invited to take action and present pledges consisting of new and concrete initiatives to be carried out by the respective participation countries and organizations. So we are very happy that 60 delegations actually submitted pledges. 43 of these were submitted by countries, and we have compiled all these pledges in the outcome document of the Malmö Forum. With regards to the focus of these pledges, we need to analyze this in more depth, but I can share that educational interventions of various kinds seem to be the most common in these pledges. Other frequently occurring initiatives focus on memorial sites and different types of memorial ceremonies. A number of countries present work on strategies or action plans against anti-Semitism, as well as the establishment of permanent special anti-Semitism coordinators. Initiatives in research on the Holocaust are also relatively frequent. The outcome document of the forum is available on the website of the Malmö Forum. And finally, let me also take this opportunity to express gratitude for the live and online participation at the forum of the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. His speech was very much appreciated by all the participants. Thank you for listening to my intervention today. I hope you have a good event, everybody. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Anne Bernice, and I'm very pleased to join you from Stockholm, where I work at the government offices as an ambassador. I would like to start by mentioning the Malmö Forum. As you have already heard from other speakers, the forum generated a large number of pledges, and as part of that, the Swedish government pledged to take on the presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA. And the Swedish presidency would start on the 1st of March and continue until the 28th of February next year. And as you can imagine, we're busy preparing the presidency now, and we have set up a secretariat for the work, a secretariat which I joined in December as the incoming chair of the Swedish presidency and of IRA. I am, of course, deeply honored to assume this role and look forward to promoting IRA's vital work for Holocaust remembrance, education and research. Chairing IRA is also gratifying thanks to the fact that it stems from an initiative from some 2 decades ago, taken by the Swedish Prime Minister at the time, Göran Persson, together with his counterparts, Prime Minister Tony Blair and President Bill Clinton. IRA began as a small organization, but today gathers 35 member states and several permanent international partners, including the UN, the EU, the OSCE, the Council of Europe. I personally very much look forward to joining forces with all of them, including, of course, our close partner Canada, to promote Holocaust remembrance, research and education, and to strengthen IRA as an organization. A key priority and indeed vehicle of the Swedish presidency will be to build on the momentum of the Malmö Forum and to follow up on the pledges that were made there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Andres, for those comments about the IRA. We know more about the organization now than we did, most of us at least, just a few minutes ago. In his statement today on Raoul Wallenberg Day, Prime Minister Trudeau said, and I quote, "The Canadian government designated January 17, the day of Raoul Wallenberg's disappearance in 1945, as Raoul Wallenberg Day to ensure that his personal example of heroism, courage, and decency is always remembered," end quote. This is a perfect segue to the conversation between Cecilia Åhlberg, board member and senior advisor to the Raoul Wallenberg Academy, and Ambassador Aline. The Raoul Wallenberg Academy was founded in 2001 by Wallenberg's sister Nina Lagergren, also Cecilia's grandmother. With Raoul Wallenberg's leadership as inspiration, the Raoul Wallenberg Academy strengthens youth to stand up for human rights and act with civil courage. Cecilia and Ambassador Aline, we are looking forward to your discussion.
Thank you very much, Lars. And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Cecilia Åhlberg here today. For me, it's really great to have you because we have actually been doing a lot of things together. When I was the Speaker of the Swedish Parliament, we had actually quite a few activities where we highlighted Raoul Wallenberg. And as Lars said, your lovely grandmother, Nina Lagergren, was always together with you and highlighting things that we are talking about today. But this is not only that we are commemorating Raoul Wallenberg and his deeds, we are also thinking about strategies and tactics, how to get the younger generation to adopt to the deeds and actually stand up against discrimination, racism, and anti-Semitism. And I know that you are doing a wonderful work in the Raoul Wallenberg Academy back home in Sweden. So I'm curious to hear about your views on how can we get more youngsters into standing up against the racism and anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, I think Raoul's story is very important as an inspiration. Younger people, as older people as well, are very inspired by him and his actions. We talk about empathy, we talk about leadership, we talk about civic courage. And I think that when we talk about civic courage, we talk about it as a muscle. And if you practice that muscle and you train that muscle, you will get better at it and you will get stronger. So you start maybe slow, say to no to somebody who says something bad to a friend. That was a bit scary, but next time it won't be so scary, and then you continue. So I think practicing is a good way to start. And I think that also young people, they don't want to be viewed as the future. They want to be viewed as the present because they are actually working now, and they are not only reacting, they're also acting. So to view young people as the present and not only the future, I think gives them a lot of strength.
It's a good point there, because sometimes when we talk about youngsters, it sounds like they're going to be in charge in 50 years and how can we treat them now? But they are actually already here and changing the society much more than we sometimes even believe. And I remember Nina Lagergren also said exactly what you said, you know, that the youngsters are here now. It's actually the present. You know. So how is the Raoul Wallenberg Academy organized in Sweden?
So we educate young people, but we also educate teachers to give them the power to teach their students. Because obviously it's a lot of different topics. It's human rights, but it's also anti-Semitism, of course, but all sorts of other discriminations, and also leadership. So I think that if you teach the teachers, then you come a long way, you reach a lot of people. And then we also try to have leadership programs for high school students. So we start when they're quite young and not only when they have reached university, but before that.
It's good that you're saying that among teachers, because later on in this program, we will actually have Canadian teachers telling us what they do to highlight Raoul Wallenberg. Actually, I have such a fond memories of your grandmother when we had all these activities, you know, and going on. And I know that you once actually told me about Raoul Wallenberg himself, and that he felt that he actually was a little bit of a, I shouldn't say a coward, but, you know, we look upon him as a very courageous man standing up against the Nazi soldiers. But I remember that you and actually Nina also said that he didn't look upon himself as he was courageous. He actually felt a little bit cowardish.
Yeah, so he's known to have said that he didn't feel like so brave. He felt like sometimes he was a coward. And I think that it's a good, it's actually strengthening for myself to realize that somebody who we think is so brave and courageous, you know, he was just a normal person with all the issues that we all have, and still he did this tremendous things that he did. So it doesn't take a very special super person. It takes a normal person who does special things, and I think that is important to remember and to be inspired by, that we can all make a difference. We can all do something, even if it's small.
And it's good that you're saying that, because we together actually went to the room, the specific room that we have in the Swedish Parliament, where we highlight good deeds. And together with your grandmom, we actually put up the Congressional Gold Medal in the walls in the Swedish Parliament once, because Raoul Wallenberg was receiving the gold medal from the Congress. And of course, it was your grandmother who actually received the gold medal. And that room is there for all visitors to the Swedish Parliament to actually come in there, look and learn from what Raoul Wallenberg did, but also what others did, like Folke Bernadotte and others, and actually have that sense, as you say, you know, that I might be a little person, but I can do something. And I think that is pretty cute, actually. Coming back to
very, very
sorry, Cecilia.
No, I think it's important. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. You know, we really need to tell everyone that sometimes it's courageous just to say enough in the classroom when you see someone being bullied. You know, you don't need to say 10,000 of Jews. You don't need to see that as the example, but you should be inspired by it, that you can do something to change the world to a much better place. Nina,
sorry, Raoul, a lot of survivors have told me that Raoul gave them hope back and the sense of human value, and I think that is very important. That there is hope. We have the Swedish Raoul Wallenberg Prize, which is it's a prize for somebody who works against anti-Semitism, for example. And there's a lot of hope out there, because we get all these suggestions for this prize, and they are just normal people. They can be a teacher that does tremendous differences, and so there is a lot of hope, because there are lots of people out there who do things in their everyday life, and we don't hear about them, but they are secret heroes.
I know also that you and your grandmother has been pushing the Swedish government pretty hard, you know, to find the solution, to understand what actually happened to Raoul Wallenberg. And, you know, we have had books coming out where we call it the diplomatic failure, what the Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs did, you know, in the first years after Raoul Wallenberg was taken by the Russians or by the Soviets at that time. And I know that your grandma Nina had this dream of actually finding Raoul and actually bring him to a real kind of grave together with the family. And unfortunately, she was never, you know, able to see that come true. But Sweden now being chair of IRA and all the work we are doing, do you think we could kind of highlight the pressure and the stress against also the Swedish government and all against the international community to actually push the Russians to tell them that we need to know the truth?
I think it is high time. It's been a lot of years and lots of different governments, and it's very much time to try and find out the truth about Raoul's fate. We still do not to this day know the exact truth, and I'm grateful if we can all together help and push the governments to work for that. Yes, thank you so much.
And as a Swedish ambassador in Canada, I can assure you that there are lots of organizations in Canada that is calling me and pushing very hard that the Swedish government should do more. And I'm pretty sure that there will be lots of highlights in the coming years now in IRA where that pressure will come. And I saw the other day that the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Sweden actually said that they were asking the Russians really to open the archives and get the truth there. So it might be an interesting year ahead, which we might... You know.
IRA is a very powerful organization with lots of different nationalities in it. So together, I hope that we can try and find out the truth for once and for all.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Cecilia. It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And thank you very much for all the work you are doing back home in Sweden to highlight Raoul Wallenberg and really telling everyone that we need to do good deeds. So thank you very much, Cecilia.
Thank you. And thank you for this day.
Thank you. And now we continue with a pre-recorded video by George Prager, a survivor of the Shoah. Please, George.
Dear audience, my name is George Prager, and I feel honored to be asked to speak to you today from Toronto, Canada. Today, on January 17, Canada officially celebrates the memory of the late Raoul Wallenberg. The Act, Bill number C-432, respecting Raoul Wallenberg's memory, was passed by the Parliament in 1999-2000. The date, January 17, was chosen because this was the date when Wallenberg was arrested in Hungary by the Soviet NKVD. Back in the 1980s, I was the chairman of the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Because of that, I had fairly frequent contacts with then Swedish ambassador to Canada, Per Anger. Per Anger knew of my background as a child survivor of the Shoah, the Holocaust, in Budapest, 1944-45, where he had worked closely as a diplomat at the Swedish legation with Raoul Wallenberg. Consequently, when Raoul Wallenberg was chosen to become Canada's first ever honorary Canadian citizen by the Canadian Parliament in 1985, Ambassador Anger asked me to accept the honor on behalf of Sweden. I felt humbled. I told Per surely he could find somebody more distinguished to accept this honor. However, at Mr. Anger's insistence, I of course complied. Reverend Roland de Cornay, MP, presented this private member's bill to the House, and it was accepted by 100% of the members upon its second reading. The copy of the bill I originally accepted is now displayed in the Archduke's Palace in Stockholm, which houses the Swedish Foreign Office. Before I continue the rest of my talk, we will listen to some music to lift up the soul. Now to the heart of the story. The Holocaust in Hungary was very swift. Hungarian Jews from towns and villages in the countryside were first to be deported, and a large majority of them did not survive the Shoah. In Budapest, about 100,000 Jews were still alive at the end of hostilities between Nazi Germany, the dreaded Szálasi Hungarian fascist regime, and Soviet forces. Raoul Wallenberg directly sheltered about 10,000 Jews in protected Swedish houses, providing food, shelter, medical care, and issued Swedish passport, also known as Schutzpasses. As well, Wallenberg also succeeded in intervening, stopping, and slowing down the deportation of Jews from Budapest to the concentration camps, and bring them almost to a standstill by threatening the local German High Command of retribution in war crime trials after the war was over. This worked, and many Jews were saved until the Soviet army entered the city. Wallenberg and fellow Swedish diplomat Prager also had the courage to go to the rail yards where the Jews were being loaded onto unheated freight cars without a bucket for personal needs and without food, water, or heat. They demanded that individuals and families be taken off as they were under the protection of the Swedish embassy. Holocaust survivors, family members, and a multitude of other people all over the world have expressed their gratitude to Raoul Wallenberg by appointing him an honorary citizen of their countries. Canada was the first country to do this, followed by the United States, Israel, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the city of Budapest. It should also be mentioned that Raoul Wallenberg, together with Prager, were honored by Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as righteous among the nations, a tribute given to Gentiles who saved Jews during the war. Statues honoring Raoul Wallenberg's memory can be found around the world. Canada and Sweden enjoy a very special relationship, and many of the Hungarian survivors and their families live in Canada. Due to this, there is a plan to build a national monument in Canada's national region, Ottawa, to honor Raoul Wallenberg's memory. The Swedish ambassador to Canada, Urban, and the Honourable Professor Irving Cutler, Canada's permanent representative to fight anti-Semitism and race hate, are negotiating with Heritage Canada and the Canadian Capital Commission to make this a reality. An unnamed Swedish donor has committed funds to cover part of the cost, providing the rest of the cost comes from Canadian sources. The estimated cost for the monument is approximately $700,000 to $800,000 plus maintenance expenses. It is our sincere hope that the Canadian government contribute approximately $300,000 plus and perpetual upkeep to make this possible. The proposal will go forward if the Canadian Planning Commission is open to amending the offer which is now on the table. Our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, reminds us on a yearly basis of the importance of the values Raoul Wallenberg taught.
Canada will also continue to expand publicly accessible Holocaust-related remembrance and education materials and bring awareness to the dangers of anti-Semitism.
The importance of the monument is that the survivors, their descendants, and Canadians of all ages and backgrounds will have an opportunity to visit the monument to learn about the man who saved 100,000 innocent people under unspeakable circumstances. It will also present an opportunity to teach younger generations how anti-Semitic, racist, and non-democratic acts affect society and how important actions by individuals are in order to prevent abuse. The monument will be a place where people can ask, what can I do to make this a better world? In closing, I want to share with you a picture of a monument inaugurated in Vienna, Austria on November 9, 2021. It lists the names of 64,000 Austrian Jews who were brutally murdered by the Nazi regime, starting already back in 1938. There was no Raoul Wallenberg on hand. The project was headed by fellow Torontonian Kurt Jakob Tutter, now 91 years old, who lost his whole family in the Shoah. He himself was grabbed and hidden by a neighbor and then came to Canada as an orphan. It took Kurt 21 years to get the monument established. The project was finally authorized by the then 30-year-old Chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz. It took the courage of a young Chancellor to approve this 30 million euro project, all paid by the Austrian federal government, the Austrian provinces, Austrian banks, and other major organizations. Surely, if little Austria can do this, hopefully it would not be so difficult for our own federal government to finance a small monument which will cost about 1/30th of the Austrian project. To finish this, to take on a positive note, let me play you a short piece of music by my friend Sten Samoli. Thank you so much for listening. Shalom v'litraot. Goodbye.
Thank you for those remarks, George. We will now go back to the conversation or the theme that Ambassador Aline and Cecilia Olbe talked about, the youth and their involvement in keeping Wallenberg's memory and values alive. And we will do that through the participation of Lisa Kluck. And she is a teacher, and she's also the co-founder and co-chair of Educators Against Anti-Semitism. It's a grassroots organization of stakeholders within the field of education, united to address growing concerns about anti-Semitism within the public school system. So Lisa, please.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Honored to be here tonight. My family actually survived from Eastern Hungary. Very few of them came here, but I learned about Raoul Wallenberg as a young adult, and I know some survivors. Educators Against Anti-Semitism does a lot of things behind the scenes, and this is something that we have been asked to be involved in, and I want to share our work with you. So bear with me, please. Most people don't see Educators Against Anti-Semitism because we very much work behind the scenes. We're all active educators, all teaching actively, including on days like today. You may find us on the web. We have a full website, and what I'm going to be presenting to you today will be posted on our website in the educational resources section. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us in 2 different places on Facebook. And in both of these places, we post different activities that we are involved in. You may not know that we've actually started them, whether they are letter writing campaigns or they're different kinds of gatherings. You may not know because we try to be very much behind the scenes. In honor of today, we developed some lessons on resiliency and Raoul Wallenberg. And the reason for resiliency is because Raoul Wallenberg maintained the recognition of humanity that showed a resilience to withstand the pressures of the day. He didn't fall prey to the overwhelming belief around the world in anti-Semitism, and was resilient to the point where he could recognize the need for humanity and especially Jews to be saved. So we created a lesson plan that has this as part of it. These lessons are different from those done by other organizations because we're not focusing on testimony. We're focusing on that concept of resiliency. And resiliency goes beyond religion. It goes beyond politics, beyond history, beyond culture. We're all talking about right now how we are surviving a pandemic. And one day somebody's going to come up with a t-shirt that says, "I survived the pandemic." And we will be able to identify that object as something that demonstrates resiliency to us. And what our lessons do is they try to help students identify what it is to be resilient and how the Schutzpass could be an object that demonstrates resiliency. We want students to recognize that one person can make a difference, and then it could be any one of them. So I'm taking you right into the specific document, and when teachers make lessons, they are very careful to take a look at what the lesson is and keep that very separate from the goals for the lesson and the curriculum expectations. So we're looking here for a particular task with an excerpt from a book by Carol Mattes, which is right here linked into the document. And if I can share it, then you'll see what it looks like. This particular document is something that a student would be using to write in their thoughts. And the idea is, it's not going to open. And the idea is that the student is not, there's the book. Okay, that was it. The student is not going to be assessed on do they understand resiliency. The student is going to be assessed based on curriculum expectations. And here I'm showing you some sample expectations from the Ministry of Education, the province of Ontario, where I happen to live. Depending on what part of the world you're working in, depending on what grade students you're teaching, you would choose your sample curriculum expectations there. And then you would develop an assessment piece to evaluate those. There is a later assessment with another written activity to look at what a Schutzpass is and how that demonstrates resiliency. And a teacher or a student could then recognize their growth and their understanding about resiliency when they compare how they did on this assessment for learning and what they talked about in that particular piece and what they talk about in the latter piece when they're looking at what a Schutzpass is and how that demonstrates resiliency. But each time the teacher is evaluating them based on curriculum expectations from government documents. So in this case, it's reading and writing, and I've only just chosen two. Here's another sample task, and this task would use different kinds of expectations because the expectations come from a different area of the curriculum, media literacy. And it comes from watching a film, which is approximately 15 minutes long, called Joseph and Amy. And the film is actually a French film, which is told in English subtitles. And there are opportunities when looking at that film to talk about resiliency, both in the characters that are shown in the film and in some of the documents that are shown in the film. I want to move forward. One more page that I wanted to share, and we're not getting to it. One of the things what we're so excited about at Educators Against Anti-Semitism is the idea that one person can make a difference, and it can happen with any of our students. This is the first set of lessons that our group is putting together specifically on anti-Semitism. There are more yet to come. We are actively working teachers, and this is something that we are taking on in our spare time just because we're interested in it, and we're so honored to be able to be part of the presentation today. Thank you so much to everyone here, and thank you so much for including us. We invite people to find us on Facebook, find us on Twitter, look at our website, and share the information there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We are honored that you wanted to participate and did participate in the event. So we are continuing now with Kailyn Rollins. She is a 15-year-old high school student at the Pierre Elliott Trudeau High School in Markham, Ontario. And she is in grade 10 of the French immersion program. She has a burning interest in dancing. She's been dancing since she was 3 years old. She also has a connection with Sweden. She's the great-granddaughter of the late Nils Kalin, who was, among other things, honorary consul general in Toronto. He was also president of SKF Canada, and he was also, or is, the founder of the Swedish Canadian Chamber of Commerce, a busy man. So, Kailyn, please give you your remarks.
My name is Kailyn, and today I will be talking about Raoul Wallenberg and the importance he has on the younger generation. Raoul Wallenberg proved himself to be a brave man, standing up against a genocide. When us younger generation hear the word genocide, we think about the past, as well as all the actions taken towards it, like who stood up for what they believed in and how that helped with change. But today we can be inspired by all people like Raoul Wallenberg who helped to create change and made an impact in our society. Anti-Semitism, racism, violence against women, and social media harassment, just to name a few, are all different forms of bullying. Many types of bullying and discrimination are seen all around us every day, and we are surrounded by it. This past year, the discovery of graves at several Canadian residential schools has shown us that discrimination can lead into genocide. But what matters is what we decide to do against bullying and discrimination. Speaking up and taking a stand against hateful actions can make a difference. Just like Raoul Wallenberg and how he was able to prove that one person can make a difference. We can help make the world a better place by saying no to bullying in all its different forms. Thank you.
Thank you, Kailyn. Very thoughtful remarks. And as you said, it is possible to stand up against bullying, against anti-Semitism, racism, diversity, and so on and so forth. So thank you for what you are doing and encouraging young people. At the end of today's program, there will be a link to a documentary, Passage to Sweden by Susanna Warlick. And we have the pleasure of having Susanna present together with Hannah Scherstein. We start by introducing Susanna. She is the owner of Bubble Soup Production. She films, edits, and produces on a freelance basis. She is truly an independent filmmaker from start to finish, and also the distribution of her films. Her previous documentaries include the Queen's Court, Supporting Actors, and Match and Marry. She is on a mission to have as many people as possible watch the movie, Passage to Sweden, and we found out earlier here that at least over 80 people have signed up on the link already, and there are more who can do that. With Susanna, as I said, is Hannah Scherstein. She's a noted educator, author. She was born in Sweden and grew up in Sweden, educated in Sweden, but has then spent most of her time in the New York City Board of Education. She is now retired from that, but is currently docent at the Museum of Jewish Heritage and at the Center of Jewish History. And for the 25 years, she served as president of Scandinavia Trio Tours, conducting kosher tours to Sweden. So let me start here by asking Susanna, what was the inspiration to the movie?
My inspiration was Hannah Scherstein, believe it or not. She was in my previous documentary, Match and Marry, and shortly after I interviewed her, she contacted me and said, Susanna, you have to do a documentary of what happened to the Jewish people in Scandinavia during World War II. Hannah is a Swedish native. She grew up in Sweden. She was the daughter of the chief Orthodox rabbi in Stockholm. And there she was, living a perfectly fine childhood in the midst of World War II, when Jews in neighboring countries were being taken to concentration camps. So it piqued my interest. And I had a boss at the time who was very supportive of my video work. And when I told him about the idea, because I didn't consider myself a historian and I didn't feel that I was qualified to make a film surrounding the Holocaust, but I told him the idea and he wrote me a check and he said, go make your next film. And he gave me enough money to go off to Scandinavia for the first time. So at that point, I thought, okay, the universe is aligned and somebody up there must want me to make this film. And I just want to say this whole conversation today is so perfect for the film because the film covers every single thing that we've talked about with Raoul Wallenberg. And I don't know, Cecilia, if you saw the film, but your grandmother is in my film. So anyhow, but I do want to say that Hannah was so right when she suggested the idea to me. She did say, nobody knows about this history. And she was right, because even when I go around today and show the film to people of Scandinavian descent even, they weren't aware of the history, and many didn't even know who Raoul Wallenberg was. So I feel that, you know, like myself, I feel like people are getting somewhat of an education watching the film, but and it is a very inspirational film, because as you were talking about educating the young, it is a film of optimism and hopefulness, because I like to show, I'm showing the people who were rescued, and I'm talking about the people who were rescuers in order for their legacy to move on. So that was my inspiration. And Hannah has a lot of wonderful stories of how it was growing up in Sweden during World War II, and also how it was when the refugees came to Sweden, and what she noticed and what she felt.
So Hannah, maybe you can add to this. You have, by the way, written what seems to be a wonderful book. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I will do that. It's evening, it's morning, about the Scandinavian experience. But you approached Susanna about the movie idea.
Yes. You know, I started doing tours to Scandinavia after I had been living in America for 35 years, and my children were kind of grown. And I was so excited to bring people to Scandinavia, because most of the places you go to in Europe, there's a very sad feeling. And when you come to Scandinavia, at least it was a feeling of light, a feeling of inspiration, a feeling of that there were good things that could happen in the worst of times. And the book that I wrote was all about survivors who came from the Holocaust, who were totally beaten down by what had happened in the Hitler regime. And they came, many of them, for example, the artist Lenka Rothman, she came and she was in an iron lung, and she was just a 16-year-old girl. And she ended up becoming a famous artist. Or Magda Eggens, who ended up writing a book. People who just rebuilt their lives in Sweden. And you could see the spirit of the people who were Holocaust survivors. It's so inspiring that instead of thinking about the past and brooding about the past and just being totally overwhelmed by it, the first thing they did when they came to Sweden, the ones who were agonat, these were women who could not get remarried because their husbands had been killed and they had no death records of them. So according to Jewish law, they weren't allowed to get remarried. So my father had to spend the whole time, from the time that the survivors came in 1945 till we left in 1947, working with these young women to interview them, to get as much information about their husbands as he could, and then to interview men so that they could be released from this bond, what's called agonat, which means a chain. And all they wanted to do was remarry and have children. And it was absolutely a population explosion at the time. And that was the spirit of the survivors, because more than anything else, they wanted to get back to life and rebuild life. And it was just a tremendous inspiration. And thank God that Sweden was there to provide them an opportunity so that they could just get healed. And even the ones who came who were too sick to survive, and many of them are buried in Malmö and many are buried in Stockholm, at least they had that last experience of being in a hospital and being taken care of and having a funeral and die in dignity.
So Susanna, when was the movie launched? And I think I saw sort of a trailer with a lot of prize awards.
Yeah, I launched the movie exactly a year ago, last January 27th for Holocaust Memorial Day. And that's when it was launched. It took me quite a long time to make it. And unfortunately, some of the people in the film are no longer with us. And I see Katrina's on there, so, and her wonderful father, Tom Lantos, is in there as well. So yeah, so it took a while to do, but I'm so, you know, I'm very grateful that it's out now and making its way around the world at this moment.
That's good. Hannah, just briefly, the two organizations you're working for now, the museum and center, what are the missions of those?
Well, the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Battery Park tells the history of pre-World War II of the Jewish communities, and then it goes into the rise of Hitler and then the building of new communities. And they also have temporary exhibits of, they had, for example, the Eichmann trial, or they had something now about Auschwitz. They have all kinds of interesting things. But I want to say, even if you're not going to ask it, how immensely fantastic it is that Sweden is putting in all this time and effort at this point to really pay attention to making a move to combat anti-Semitism. I have, for example, a friend who lives in Malmö. He's a rabbi there, and he has had incredibly amount of anti-Semitic incidents happening to him. And yet he stays put because he's not going to leave. He's not going to allow them to scare him away. But it is just so sad that the world has changed so much, and we have to put so much time and effort into combating all this. And I'm so delighted and so grateful that you're putting all this time in and that you're paying so much attention to it. I have a question for you people. There was a time that they had something called Tierschutz-Orden, which was based on an essay by Amos Oz. It was an organization for people to join, and it was very active among young people. Is that still in existence?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if the ambassador knows or if Åsa knows, or... But we will find out.
It was a fantastic organization, and the whole idea of it was what some of your speakers said, that we don't always have to think in terms of doing big things and doing what Raoul Wallenberg did to save thousands of people, but that we can do small things, and even small things of just showing that we're concerned, because Elie Wiesel said that the opposite of love is not hate, but it's indifference. And we have to be involved, and we have to care, and we have to be concerned and observe. And I think all of that was this Tierschutz-Orden, was to get people to appreciate the fact that even small acts can add up to something. And we have to break through complacency and indifference.
On that note,
Lars,
yeah?
I can actually give you some bad news about Tierschutz-Orden. It was declared bankrupt in 2021.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Really,
I mean, I fully agree with everything you said, Hannah, about, you know, the important work they did and the kind of the prizes and certificates they gave out for lots of good work. But if I'm informed correctly, I think it was actually the pandemic and things around that made it not sustainable any longer to finance. So that's the reason why it was closed down. That's what I know. I don't know if Cecilia Wallenberg knows anything more about it, but
it maybe could be reawakened again. Maybe it could be started up again. And those people who are teachers, who are so emphatically excited and enthusiastic about teaching about the Holocaust, maybe they should read about it, learn about it, and put it into their schools. It was a very good project.
I agree. It was a great thing. But I would also say that actually, you know, the work that Cecilia Wallenberg and the others are doing at the Raoul Wallenberg Academy and lots of other institutes that we have in Sweden is doing the same thing as Tierschutz-Orden. So there is a lot of other things going on. But unfortunately, they closed down a year ago.
Well, I was just going to make that remark too, that it sounded like there were similarities with what the Raoul Wallenberg Academy is doing, but we will look into it, Hannah. I want to thank both of you for being part of this. We could probably continue for another hour with just discussing with you and sharing that. So everyone has an opportunity to find the link. The link is supposed to be in the chat, and maybe it even shows up on the screen, but it will be in the chat for those. So before I hand over to my very good friend Len Kleiner, chair of the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce, to finish this event, I want to once again return to what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said in his Wallenberg Day statement. On this day, I encourage all Canadians to find inspiration in Mr. Wallenberg's legacy. His undeniable bravery serves as a reminder to us all to protect our most vulnerable and fight against discrimination as we work to build a more just, inclusive, and compassionate society here and around the world. End of quote. That is a very important message that we all can and should take with us. And now I leave the last word to Mr. Kleiner, who will be, and then we can, I noticed that the link is there, so that, and you have found it in the chat. So Len, please.
Lars, I'm very happy to offer the closing remarks. My name is Leonard Kleiner. I am the chairman of the board of the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Toronto. And what an amazing event. This hour and a half just flew by, I think. And I looked at the numbers, over 150 people that was online. That's, excuse me, that's a success. The honorary Canadian citizenship to Raoul Wallenberg was gracefully accepted by George Prager back in 1985, when he was the chair for the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And here we are, almost 40 years later, celebrating and paying tribute to Raoul Wallenberg. This story makes every Swede so proud. And I believe we all agree that we are much better together, all of us. On behalf of the entire membership, friends and colleagues of the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce, it is my pleasure and honor to extend a heartfelt thank you to the speakers, all the participants, and all that made this wonderful event possible. Raoul Wallenberg is a light among the nations. Not only did he save 100,000 innocent lives, but he also set an example for all of us as individuals and to the society as a whole to create and uphold just and inclusive society. In closing, I'd like to thank Ambassador Aline, former Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce chair, and my friend George Prager, Åsa Corneliusson from the embassy in Ottawa, and the team at the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Toronto for all work and effort invested to create and arrange this amazing event. Thank you very much and have a great evening. And I encourage you now to watch the film Passage to Sweden from Susanna Wallace. Thank you.